Sir Laurence Olivier's Confessions of an Actor autobiography, published in 1982, is one of a few where the actor traces homosexual and bisexual desires to being molested as a child. In an interesting twist of fate, Confessions of an Actor was the title of John Barrymore's autobiography as well, and the Olivier family had some similarities to the Barrymore family. Laurence Olivier's older sister, Sybil Olivier, was a minor actress, and both the Barrymores and the Oliviers suffered the death of their mother relatively early. In Laurence Olivier's case, it put him on a path to stardom. Here are excerpts from Olivier's autobiography concerning his romantic life and love of Vivien Leigh. With hindsight, I suppose the allowable feeling of superiority conferred by solo singing, plus my giddily successful acting opportunities, lent my exterior a hint of show-off, and the female roles varnished it with an extra coat of girlishness. All of which is a polite way of explaining away the fact that I was universally known as that sidey little shit Olivier. I very soon caught the attention, rapidly followed by the attentions, of a few of the older boys. The prefects themselves, in the dignity of their exalted positions, were above such things. I did not in any way welcome such attentions. I knew well enough what they spelt. My first experience of that had been a somewhat frightening one. Calling at the All Saints' church house one day before I joined the choir, I was stopped by a large boy, an old choir boy, who offered to show me the stage upstairs where the choir school plays were performed. I was dressed in a kilt, Care Tartan. My second name, as was my father's, is Care. No one has ever found the Scottish connection. With the velvet jacket and silver buttons, a customary Sunday outfit inherited from my brother. This boy flung me down on an upper landing, threw himself on top of me, and made me repeat again and again, "No, no, let me go, I don't want it." This I did willingly enough, but it only increased his ardor. His exercises were getting more powerful when to my relief he thought he heard someone coming up the stone stairs. He pushed me down these steps and himself disappeared farther up towards the top of the building. I rushed down, tearful and trembling, in desperate search of my mother, into whose arms I gratefully flung myself. On the way home she asked me the lad's name, which she recognized. A year or two back he had come to a birthday party for me, to which Mummy invited all 14 boys. She made me promise to tell her if anything of the kind should ever happen again. The reactions I provoked 2 years later at St. Edward's were seemingly shared by the entire school, quite instantaneously. I was ostracized. I was a flirt. During my first marriage, I had got over, like a spendthrift sigh, my nearly passionate involvement with the one male with whom some sexual dalliance had not been loathsome for me to contemplate. I had felt it desperately necessary to warn him that, dustily old-fashioned as it may seem, I had ideals which must not be trodden under foot and destroyed, or I would not be able to answer for the consequences, and neither would he. It must be exceedingly difficult to believe that in spite of my history as a pampered choir boy, and the attentions paid to me at the next school, which, no matter how unwelcome, unfairly labelled me as the school tart, I felt the homosexual act would be a step darkly destructive to my soul. I was firm in my conviction that heterosexuality was romantically beautiful, immensely pleasurable, and rewarding in contentment. It is surprising this faith should have withstood an onslaught of such passionate interest, and this, together with the disillusionment that followed the initial experience of my early marriage, did not throw me off course or even make me waver. Well, perhaps I must allow it did do that. It would be dreadfully wrong if any of this should be taken to imply I ever found anything in the remotest unrespectable about homosexuality. It is certain he or she, in pursuit of their natural inclinations, should not be pitied for a lack of romance in their lives. I am prepared to believe the sense of romance in those of our brothers and sisters who incline towards love of their own sex is heightened to a more blazing pitch than in those who think of themselves as normal. Supporting this is my firm conviction, any who nurse artistic pretensions must discard any sort of prejudice which might limit the broadest understanding of human nature. I first set eyes upon the possessor of this wondrous, unimagined beauty on the stage of the Ambassador's Theatre, where she was playing in Ashley Duke's The Mask of Virtue, in which she had contracted a considerable attention, though not at this time chiefly on account of her promise as an actress. Apart from her looks, which were magical, she possessed beautiful poise. Her neck looked almost too fragile to support her head, and bore it with a sense of surprise, and something of the pride of the master juggler who can make a brilliant maneuver appear almost accidental. She, Vivien Leigh, also had something else, an attraction of the most perturbing nature I ever encountered. It may have been the strangely touching spark of dignity in her that enslaved the ardent legion of admirers. A short while after this first sighting of her we ran across her. Every one in the profession was bound to meet sometime in the well-worn run of London spots, and I'm almost sure this particular encounter was in the Savoy Grill lobby. We had taken a charming, smallish place in Burchett's Green, between Maidenhead and Ivor Novello's lovely place in Littlewick Green, and we invited Vivien and her husband for a week-end. Like any first act of the period, isn't it? One afternoon I was making up for a matinee of Romeo when she popped into my dressing room at the new theatre. It was ostensibly to invite us to something or other. She only stayed a couple of minutes, and then she gave me a soft little kiss on the shoulder, and was gone. I soon began to feel sorry for Jill, my first wife, indeed to feel pain for her and of course guilt. But this thing was as fatefully irresistible for us as for any couple from Siegmund and Sieglinde to Windsor and Simpson. It sometimes felt like an illness, but the remedy was unthinkable. Only an early Christian martyr could have faced it. Virtue seemed to work upside down. Love was like an angel. Guilt was a dark fiend. At its every surge Macbeth would haunt me. There comes my fit again. 2 years of furtive life, lying life, sneaky. At first I felt a really worm-like adulterer, slipping in between another man's sheets. The studio or theatre dressing-room game blessed by generations of randy actors, but unprotected from sudden intrusion. Then darting sporadic little hops, covering some mileage. The night we escaped to Stamford in Lincolnshire is clear in my mind. Anywhere odd and unexpected to reduce the likelihood of detection and subsequent joy to the gossip columnists. It was 2 years before we rewarded ourselves with the selfish relief of confession. We both happened to choose the same night for the event, and our affair became public property. Vivien's husband struck me as being a dull man, dry, cerebral, without sparkle. I was quite wrong. He suffered much more than he should have been required to. He was highly intelligent, clever, but not exciting or outwardly romantic. Later, when provision for love had been sorted out, divorces filed, marriages arranged, respectability hopefully bid for, and the scandalous couple returned home for the war effort, we all became friends. We would go on to stay with each other, and I grew to like Lee Holman very much. In 1937 we started to accept engagements together, Hamlet in Elsinore with Vivien playing Ophelia. We could not keep from touching each other, making love almost within Jill's vision. This welding closeness tripped the obvious decision, and two marriages were severed. I suspect this passage may not be pleasant to read. It is, to be honest, a little nauseating to set down. Artists are supposed to suffer. It is part of their gift. The office of drama is to exercise, possibly to exhaust, human emotion. The purpose of comedy is to tickle those emotions into an expression of light relief, of tragedy to wound them, and bring the relief of tears. Disgust and terror are the other points of the compass. I plumped for Hamlet for my first Old Vic season in 1937, which I had taken with Ralph Richardson's moral support. Having long ago decided if ever I had the good fortune to lead a season, I would start with the big one, Hamlet. For my generation, determined upon realism, the burning question was, what makes him what he is? Two books recently appeared, Dover Wilson's What Happens in Hamlet, and a work on the Oedipus complex by Ernest Jones. Hamlet offered an impressive array of symptoms, spectacular mood swings, cruel treatment of his love, and above all a hopeless inability to pursue the course required of him. The Oedipus complex, therefore, can claim responsibility for a formidable share of all that is wrong with him. There is great pathos in his determined efforts to bring himself to the required boiling point, and in the excuses he finds to shed this responsibility. He also has his weakness for dramatics. This would be reasonable if the dramatics spurred him to action, but unfortunately they help delay it. It is as if his shows of temperament not only exhaust him, but give him relief from his absorption in his purpose, like an actor who, having spent his all in rehearsal, feels it redundant to go through with the performance. After all this work, Vivien and I gave way utterly to damned luxury, as old King Hamlet's ghost describes it. 8 weeks in France, driving from Boulogne straight down what has since been called La Route Gastronomique. For us it was mapped out by Charles Lawton, with whom Vivien had been making a picture. Past Paris to Versailles, then Avalon, Dijon, Beaune, Macon, Vienne, Montelimar, staying across the Rhone at Courdreau of the delicious wine, then Avignon, and straight on down to a rapturous little bay, and peace. Some years after the war, World War II, I thought I'd go back there, and I suffered an appalling disappointment. One is told to be careful about returning to places after a war. There can be some shocks. Here in the bay, next to Pointe d'Ager, I found the place had been almost entirely razed. But what struck me far more forcibly than that was the atmosphere. Where there had been such a delightfully happy aura, there was now horrid, haunted misery. We came home to find we had missed the London season. Never mind, theatres are nakedly public places, and we couldn't bear to be seen in public if we could decently avoid it. Time enough when we had to stand up again on stage, and that was not so far off now. Macbeth was looming in December, and I had to steel myself for it, set my shoulders, brace my tights, put on my chain-mail jockstrap, and hope for the best. Michel St. Denis was to direct it, the Motleys were to do the sets and costumes, George Devine would light it, and Judith Anderson was to be my Lady Macbeth. This was my first study of Macbeth, and I was not an unparalleled success. A strange thing, it played to the best houses ever known to date at the Vic. Queen Elizabeth, not to be Queen Mother for some 15 years yet, paid a visit to see this curious production. I was much encouraged by this, as it seemed to indicate the gossip concerning my private life had not reached far or high yet, but of course that would only be a question of time. There were hints of murmurings from the public, an isolated boo from the gallery, a brick sent through the post with a note saying, "For Olivier's folly." I was in constant fear it would suddenly get dangerous, But the houses continued to be full, and though I couldn't help sensing a sullenness among the crowd outside the stage door, which was noticeably smaller than usual, there was no outspoken rudeness or challenge. It did strike me that when there were a few bids for my autograph, it was surely in the manner that they would have asked Jack the Ripper for his. Munich was upon us a time of dread, a kind of lugubrious dress rehearsal for September 1939. The show itself ceased to threaten for a brief respite, but it was only a postponement, as between a tryout and a London production. I got my dearest old friend on the phone one day and asked him, "Ralph, be an angel and think a minute for me. There's a friend. Should I go to Hollywood and play Heathcliff in Wuthering Heights?" Ralph obligingly thought for a moment, and then said, "Yes, bit of fame, good." William Wyler, the most prestigious of Hollywood film directors, had of course come over to goose me into it, and when I got to Hollywood my apprehensions returned. I had done one film with Merle Oberon, now Mrs. Alex Corda, and liked her reasonably well, but now, as I tried to establish some relationship with both my director and co-star, I found my feelings were obstinately lukewarm towards both of them. I was blind with misery at being parted from Vivien, who would have been the perfect Cathy, and I was sure Merle was lacking in the essential passionate qualities. Vivien, in company with a myriad of other actresses, had an almost demonic determination to play Scarlet in Gone with the Wind. It should be appreciated, though it isn't easy in retrospect, the odds against her getting the part would create a whole new scale of betting at Ladbrokes today. But I too nursed the secret ambition for her. This provided a secondary reason for her to sail across and then fly from New York to Cloverfield Airport. The first was pure, driving, uncontainable, passionate love, which to my joy she shared strongly enough to make the journey as speedily as possible. In the meantime I had a few quiet words with the agent Myron Selznick, indicating to him there was someone coming over to visit me, who might quite possibly be of extraordinary interest to him. He looked knowingly at me, and we said no more. I waited for her crouched in the back of a car, a few feet behind the airport entrance. The Beverly Hills Hotel in those days was not at all what it is now. It had rather shabby basket furniture, only dismally achieving a colonial style. As in the general run of hotels the world over, if you invested in a suite, nobody asked any questions. I took Vivien along to Myron, who studied her, looking from her to me, and back with growing interest. I said innocently, "I think we ought to take her along to meet David. Don't you, Myron?" He nodded slowly, realization beginning to dawn. His brother David Selznick, about to launch into production with Gone with the Wind, had become badly stuck over the casting of Scarlet. He put Rhett Butler straight out to the American public for them to cast. The public responded with several million votes, almost everyone citing Clark Gable, a nice exercise in democracy. Leslie Howard was an obviously popular choice for Ashley Wilkes, as was Olivia de Havilland for Melanie. Only Scarlet remained. David boiled it down to a final choice between three: Bette Davis, Paulette Goddard, and Jean Arthur. This provoked endless arguments and much ill feeling. Davis was universally regarded as exceptional, in fact the best actress, but did not approximate to Margaret Mitchell's description. Goddard was much the closest in looks, but her acting was in doubt. Arthur had the advantage of being the darkest horse of the three. I never believed David had serious intentions concerning Joan Crawford. He just liked to boost the competitive element among women. Myron picked us up in a car that evening, and we headed due south to Culver City, where on the old Pathé lot David was burning 40 acres of ancient exterior sets for the fire in Atlanta, for which that city has never recovered. 3 times we saw the horse and wagon drive through the flaming archway of the barn, with the same double for Gable each time, but 3 different types for Scarlet. After the last passage through, a wire was pulled and the roof of the barn fell in a flaming crash. Flames are obligingly easy things to cut on, so the three Scarlets were readily interchangeable. The shooting over, no attempt was made to extinguish the fire, and by its light I could just make out the figures of George Cukor, the original director and devoted friend, and David, whom I also knew well from our business differences in 1932. I looked back at Vivien, her hair giving the perfect impression of Scarlet's, her cheeks prettily flushed, her lips adorably parted, her green eyes dancing and shining with excitement in the firelight. I said to myself, David won't be able to resist that. I retreated, leaving the field to Myron. David and George were approaching, and Myron stepped towards them. He indicated Vivien and said, David, meet Scarlett O'Hara. David peered very intently at Vivien. Myron made a vague gesture towards me. David threw a "Hello, Larry" into the air, roughly in my direction. Myron and I were left together, eye to eye. David had drawn Vivien a little way apart from the crowd and was fixing up an immediate test with her, promising to make every allowance for what would naturally be a very imperfect Southern accent. George was with them and was clearly interested too. I could hardly believe what was happening, but there it was. David took every advantage possible in Vivien's contractual negotiations, insisting on a one-way option contract for 7 years. 7 years is the most that is legally allowed in any American contract on account of an old anti-slavery law. Of course, now we have indefinite contracts due to the ongoing greed in American law. The film was envisaged to take at least 6 months, and he would not move higher than 20 grand. This, for the movie part of the century, was hardly generous, and I said as much to him a bit later. David defended himself stoutly, saying I was unreasonable, and he'd be the laughing-stock of all of his friends if he paid the actress any more, as she was an unknown, a discovery, for such an opportunity. Wuthering Heights was finished, and I had to think about getting back to some work. It was better not to smudge the career image by hanging around, hoping for a job. The best thing career-wise would be to get myself a good appearance in the New York theater. And this was provided for me by Miss Catherine Cornell, in No Time for Comedy. It was to be a wild success. As rehearsals drew to an end, worrisome news was coming from Hollywood, from Vivien. Exhaustion coupled with hysteria, owing to our harshly testing separation, was producing dangerous symptoms, and David got me on the phone and implored me to get out there somehow, to use my influence to calm things down, if only for a day. Vivien was allowed, while still due for a series of retakes, to leave Hollywood for a few weeks' respite. She was a bit too quick off the mark for me, as I would not finish my engagement for a couple of weeks or so. Vivien had perforce to stay and be made most welcome by my firmly tried friends in the play with me. In due course we were on the SS Majestic going home. It was sweet, it is always sweet, to be home. We took a fortnight in our adored France, and then stopped off at home again to pick up her mother, a sweet, pretty woman, a highly successful beautician named Gertrude Hartley. Then back to Hollywood, where Vivien was quickly involved in her Gone with the Wind retakes, and I happy with Alfred Hitchcock in Rebecca. It seemed no time at all before the unbelievable shock of the war was upon us. There was a general directive to all our British countrymen abroad who did not already have a commission or were not within the required age group to stay put. Did we not appreciate that if every Englishman living abroad were to come gallantly dashing home, the public services would have had to face an additional population of anything up to 500,000 extra mouths to feed, and extra hands to find employment for? It was a painful situation, and wretchedly embarrassing with the Americans, who for once were not our very enthusiastic hosts. Many of them seemed far from certain whose side they were on. There was an enthusiastically pro-German feeling in those areas of the United States containing proportions of German immigrants. Milwaukee, for instance, was largely German-speaking. Whether it would be useful or not, I soon began to feel it would be better for us to go home and to take whatever came. And so the 1930s went limping out on a note as baleful and grim as a foghorn on a dark night. I wanted to be married to Vivien before arriving home with her. I couldn't believe there would be much allowance made for us in the stern situation we were bound to find in England. I was powerless, though, to fulfill this intention, because my divorce could not be made absolute until the next August. We could not be alarmed by the horrid nature of one particularly extravagant rumor that came our way. The danger from air raids of shattered eardrums in young children caused us to arrange an Atlantic crossing for both our children of our previous marriages. This was not accomplished for a full year, owing to an ill turn of fate, for which I only have to thank a rash decision of mine. The bad decision was to agree to a suggestion from our friend George Cukor. If you want to make a little extra money before you go off, why don't you put on and send on the road Romeo and Juliet? You could make a fortune in no time at all. I am ashamed to say that in no time our hearts quickened to the idea of making a little splash, not to say a little extra impressive acclaim as Shakespeareans, not just film actors. Should we survive the war, we might wish we had taken advantage of the hour to sow seeds of more potency of Shakespeare in the United States than we had had opportunity to do before this time. As soon as we had made our deals for the Lady Hamilton film in 1941, and Alex Corda treated us both very handsomely, we made arrangements for the ones most on our consciences to come over. Vivien's little Suzanne, in the care of her grandmother Gertrude, was taken over by relatives in Vancouver, while Jill, with my 4-year-old son Tarquin, would be better off in Hollywood, where she might pick up old contacts, and there was reasonable hope of obtaining some film jobs. Happily this happened. Vivien and I, by taking home only a modest amount, were able to leave in the hands of those for whom we were responsible enough to keep their bodies and souls together for 4 or 5 years. We found a small house with an egg-shaped pool on Cedar Brook Drive, and worked with Alex Corda on our script for Lady Hamilton. The picture was shot in a small, little-known studio right in the middle of Hollywood, then called General Services. The work was harmonious throughout. We were all professionals, mutually respectful and efficient. The years of happy association that Vivien, Alex, and I shared were evident in the final film. Vivien and I married in Santa Barbara on August 21st, 1940. We were now free to go, just as soon as we discharged our obligations to this, the last professional commitment we would engage ourselves to for how long. Almost as soon as Alex said cut on our last shot, we were off and away.